Welcome to Wild Spirits Outdoors, the place for real hunting talk, tactics, and a few laughs. Now, let's dive in with your host, Brad Deachon.
Hey guys and gals, welcome back to Wild Spirits Outdoors. If you're listening on the day of the drop, today is Tuesday, September 23rd, and I am flying solo in the studio once again. Last week when I recorded, I said I was going to do a deep dive today, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I did change a couple things. I was going to try to get a whiteboard in here, and I was going to try to draw. I was going to have to change out to a different camera that would follow me around, and I just didn't have time to get it all done. But I think I can use the power of the spoken word to paint a picture. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do today. It is so close to hunting season here in Michigan. I'm not even going to be able to go out, and I'm still just losing my mind excited. I'm so excited for everybody that's going to get out there and get after it. My arm is feeling fantastic. Physical therapy is going exceptionally well, and I'm just going to continue to maintain just a positive vibe. I appreciate any prayers out there. Working this arm out as much as they will let me do it, and I am still very hopeful that I will get a bow in my hand yet this season here in the state of Michigan. I'm also excited to go do some muzzleloading hunting. Definitely in Ohio. Also looking at hitting Indiana, and don't tell the wife, but I'm thinking about maybe hitting another state, possibly Kentucky. We'll see. It's all up in the air right now. Just living fast, man, living fast. Merchandise, no update since last week. Just bear with me, guys. I appreciate the patience. I know I've gotten messages kind of asking, hey, where's things at on that? I'm working on it, but a lot of stuff going on. Again, I have a full-time job, and it's tough to get everything done in a week that I need to get done in a week. Not to mention I've had plumbing issues in my house. It's just been a big old ball of fun. And since yesterday, I've been fighting a little bit of a chest sore throat type of deal. So if my voice is even more deeper and more mundane and boring than it normally is, you're in for a treat today, because you know what? I kind of sound like Johnny Cash. I hear the train a-coming. Anyway, guys, excited to have you guys join. Excited to dive into wind currents and thermals and how they work. As always, I've got a crap ton of show notes here. I write down a lot of this stuff, keep myself kind of on track. Several pages here, and I'm going to try to go through it cleanly and really try to paint a picture. As hunters, I know, we all know what wind is. Most of us understand thermals, or at least have a conceptual knowledge of what thermals do. I'm going to try to dig into it a little deeper. And again, as always, I hope there's a nugget or two in here for people that they can pick up on and maybe make things make more sense for them and make them more successful in the woods. So, let's kind of dig into it. The main goal of this podcast today is going to be just setting the stage and how wind matters when we're hunting, and how hunters know how to use wind to their advantage. So, while we all understand it and we all know what a predominant wind is, we've all, had a puff bottle, or we've thrown some milkweed and we see what the wind does. That does not always qualify us to actually know how to use that wind to our advantage. So that's what we're going to try to dig into. You can wear the best camo patterns. You can be super, super quiet. You can sit still. You can get non-auditorially or visually busted. But that sniffer, if you remember from last week, that sniffer's powerful. Way more powerful than ours is. And if you're not playing the wind game right, you're going to lose. It's just that simple. So let's break it down. Let's talk about wind, thermals, things that can affect both, like terrain, and let's talk about a little bit of strategy. Let's talk about some strategy. Let's talk about strategies that we can actually use when we're out hunting. And again, I'm going to try to paint a picture so we can actually visualize air movement as I'm sitting here talking. So, first things first is just going to be wind. What is wind? And let's talk about the basics of it. And let's talk about how the wind works as it relates to us in hunting. Wind is just air movement, problem solved right there, right? It's air movement from high pressures to low pressures. And we all have prevailing winds depending on the regions that we hunt in. Here in Michigan, excuse me, in the fall season, we have a predominant west-northwest prevailing wind. So most of the time, that's the direction your wind's going to come out of. Now, obviously, we get those days where we get the south winds or east winds, the nor'easters, all that good stuff. But we do have a prevailing wind here in the state of Michigan. Once you break down from the prevailing wind, based on even the property that you hunt, or even a portion of the property you hunt, the wind can be different from one chunk of your land to a different chunk of your land. And that's all based on, micro features and how timber and fields and water features can affect how the wind currents move around to change how the prevailing wind is actually acting on your property. So we've got different types of wind behavior. We've got steady winds. We've got moderate to light winds. We've got wind gusts. We've got swirling winds. This can all play an effect. We all look at the forecast before we go hunting. Okay, which direction the wind's out of, and we try to mentally prepare and prep for how we're going to hunt based on where that wind is coming out of. However, that forecast versus reality can be completely different. Again, like I said, it can change from just different stand locations on one property, let alone, going to different locations. So let's think about the forecast, but then let's also think about the reality of the situation when we get to where we're hunting. Excuse me again. I apologize about the clear in my throat. It's probably going to happen more often than not because, like I said, I am fighting a little bit of a chest/sore throat thing. It sucks. I don't ever get sick, and when I do, I turn into a big old whiny baby, or so I've been told. But anyway, I use Onyx, I use Deercast, I use Hunt Stand, I look at the National Weather Service. There's a million different things you can look at that are going to give you, the most up to date prevailing wind for that day that you're going out hunting, and that's going to give you the general direction. But again, terrain and different features can completely change that. So let's dive into that a little bit. We know air moves around. We know that even when you have a prevailing wind, we know that wind can change based on terrain features. How deer use that and how deer focus on playing the wind in their favor is going to be part of our determination as to what we're going to do. So again, we know deer survive by using the wind. As hunters, we understand that, and that's got to be our number one priority when we're going out after deer. Again, to reiterate from last week, deer have 300 million scent receptors in the old sniffer. So they are far and above what we are as human beings, and they are even far and above, some of the best tracking dogs like we discussed. They can smell ground scent many, many, many hours after it was laid down. When we think about how our scent travels, our scent is not linear. It doesn't leave our body and just travel in a linear line. As it leaves us, obviously it fans out and it creates a little bit of a cone. And that cone can change in size and it can change in direction based on everything we're going to talk about here in this episode. Your scent is predominantly going to travel downwind, like I said, in a cone-shaped pattern. It's going to be a wide spread. It's not going to be a narrow path. So we've got to take that into consideration, obviously, and we all know that. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that. But just remember that even a slight shift in wind direction can completely change that cone. So if your cone's spreading straight out from you and you're hunting, if I were to turn around and I'm hunting behind me, I should probably do this a better example. If I'm facing the direction that I want to hunt and the wind is in my face as it goes behind me, it's V'ing out and it's making that spread out cone. Deer are going to understand that, and they're going to make their movements based on how that scent disperses and how it travels. Excuse me. Typically, when we think of deer bedding, deer, and this isn't an always factual statement, but a good rule of thumb is typically, and especially for flatlanders like me here in Michigan, I don't have a ton of terrain features where I hunt. Some areas I do, but if you just think of it as like an ag land type hunter where you're pretty flat here in the state of Michigan, typically a deer is going to bed with the wind at its back, and it's going to be watching downwind, so it can smell anything approaching from behind it, and it can see anything coming at it from another direction. Now, if you take that to hill country, they can get a twofold benefit from the wind, because they can bed down with the wind at their back, and as the morning and the day warms up, thermals are going to pull scent from down below up to where they're bedding. So they're actually getting wind behind them, and they're getting that thermal. So they're getting like this circular wave of scent where it's coming in from behind them and it's rolling, and then it's pulling back up that thermal back to them, so they can smell things in front of them and behind them. Like we talked last week, when you're calling or rattling to a deer, they're gonna make typically a beeline for the direction that they heard that noise. And then when they don't see something, they're typically going to try to circle around to try to get downwind to figure out where those deer went. That's why if you're hunting in an open area where you can actually have a decoy set up, that's why a decoy can be extra beneficial, because you can set that decoy up, basically right where you want that shot. They're going to see it. They're going to have a visual. They're not going to be so inclined to circle downwind of it. They're just going to try to approach it head on. That's why we typically turn our decoys so that they're kind of quartering towards us, so that as that buck circles around to get head on with that decoy, we're giving you a broadside / quartering away shot. For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to pretty much talk about bucks and how bucks travel. It's pretty consistent even with does, but we're going to really focus on how bucks use it. So when bucks are traveling, regardless of the time of the year, typically, they're usually they're traveling a crosswind. Especially as we get closer and closer to the rut, they're going to more frequently and more consistently travel with a crosswind. And that crosswind is going to either be a crosswind that's taking scent from a bedding area to where they're walking, or it's going to be taking scent from a food source to where they're walking. So they don't actually have to go bomb around in a bunch of thickets looking for deer or looking for does. They can just simply walk the crosswind, and if there's a hot doe in there, they can pick her scent up, and the chase is on from there. Same with the feeding area. Excuse me. Let me take a drink of water real quick. Something else we talked about in last week's episode was a whiskey wind or a cut wind or an off wind or a kill wind, whatever you want to word it as, versus a safe wind. I grew up, once I better understood wind, I shouldn't say I grew up, because when I first started hunting, I just hunted the same spot regardless all the time. But as I started to get a better understanding of wind, I hunted safe winds most often. I would get downwind of a deer trail or downwind of a scrape, and I would try to get myself set up where I had no fear or very little fear of a deer getting downwind of me as it's traveling that deer path or trail intersection or approaching that scrape. That's a safe wind. People still do it today. I do it on certain occasions. There's certain stands I hunt that are just set up as a safe wind, and that's typically not on a new property that I'm going to, or a hang and bang, or when I'm out of state. I don't hunt like that at all. On my property, I'm going to be more inclined to hunt a safe wind. I can manipulate deer movement on my property through food plots, hinge cuts, et cetera, et cetera. So hunting a safe wind, I don't know why I keep saying "safed" with a T, but hunting a safe wind is definitely not a bad thing, especially if you have control of the property and you can create that manipulation you need to put the deer where you want the deer to be and prevent them from getting behind you, essentially. A kill wind, crosswind, whiskey wind, wind, whatever you want to call it, it's risky. You're giving that deer 90% advantage that it believes that there's no way it's going to be able to get in danger because its nose is gonna save it. So you're just hunting off from that wind, and that's where that slight shift in how the wind is blowing or the speed at which the wind is blowing can completely change how a hunt's going to work out for you. And we'll talk about that a little more as we get into it here. But those kill winds, they're risky, but boy, can they get you into some exciting situations. So, like I said, we'll talk about that here in a little bit more. Then we'll talk about thermals. Let's get into thermals here. Thermals are basically just a daily cycle. It happens every single day, and there's several factors that can affect the intensity of a thermal. From a basic standpoint, it's as the sun heats everything up, warm air rises, so the thermals pull upward. That doesn't just mean pulling up a hill. That means they literally pull upward. If you've ever been sitting in a tree stand middle of the day, maybe maybe you're on a ridge top or you're in a saddle feature, and there's not a lot of, there's plenty of openings in the canopy for plenty of sunlight to get in there. It's going to heat that ground up. And if there's, especially when you're in saddles, because you're kind of protected from that wind, you can take a piece of milkweed, let it go, and it might travel just a couple of feet from you from that slight predominant wind, unless you have a really steady wind. But let's just talk about a calm day here. You've got very little wind, you let that milkweed go, and it flutters just a few feet, and then you watch it, and it goes straight up in the air. And it gets, it'll get 15, 20 feet above you before it actually picks up some kind of a wind current, and then it'll start traveling with that wind current. Morning thermals, I don't want to say it's bad information because it's not, but I've heard a lot of people say, in the mornings, as things heat up, your thermals are going to rise. And that's 100% true. But in the morning, when you first get there, that ground is cold and it doesn't just heat up, in the blink of an eye. It takes time. So in the morning, your thermals are typically still pulling down. That's why when I'm hunting ridges or hill country, I don't like to approach from the tops in the mornings. I prefer to approach from the bottoms, or if I have a high confidence rate of where the deer are traveling back into bedding from, if they're coming from food source, I want to get on that same level as where I believe they're coming back in from. So maybe I'm a third of the way up or whatever, but those thermals are still pulling down. So in the mornings, I like to approach accordingly. And again, like we said, at sunrise, the ground is still significantly cooler, and it takes a lot longer for that ground to heat up. And depending on the type of terrain you're in, it can take significantly longer. You might have very brief rising thermals in particular hill country areas, where there might only be a short window, just a couple of hours maybe, where thermals are actually pulling up and rising. And that's all, again, it depends on the wind speeds. It depends on how much sun is getting into where you're hunting. It depends on just how much the wind is blowing, the aggressiveness of the terrain, if there's water features, etc. When you get into valleys, that air has a tendency to suck down into those. Valleys are typically cooler than side slopes are. So that even if you've got a side slope and the thermals are rising, if there's any valley feature, those thermals are going to slowly get pulled back in, and they're going to suck back down into that valley, almost creating like a waterfall effect. Like the water's rolling up, and then it catches, and then it rolls back down into that valley. Midday is typically when your thermals are going to be their most prevalent on the upward pull. On sunny days, that sun has had a chance to heat everything up, and that's when your thermals will really start to pull upwards. Excuse me. when those thermals become really prevalent and you've got a lot of sunlight, a lot of warmth to the ground, like I said, it's not just going to carry up a hill, but it can literally carry your straight up, and then it can become really, who knows where it's going to come back down at. I've watched milkweed as far as I could see it, and it was still rising, and it was still just kind of meandering around, and that doesn't do the deer any help at all. That makes them probably a little more skittish. That's why on calm days, I'm not a huge fan of hunting calm days. I mean, I love it when it's quiet and you can hear everything that's going on, but your thermals and just the inconsistency of the wind speeds can make it a complete nightmare to hunt. And I'm sure you guys understand that, and I don't need to dive into that too deep. But obviously, an 8 to 15 mile an hour pretty steady wind can be really beneficial, because not only does it create some consistency to the wind direction, but it can also defeat the thermals. So that's something else you got to keep in mind as well. Let's talk a little bit more about the factors that affect the thermals. Again, we already touched on it, but I want to make sure I touch on all the specifics. So again, shady areas versus areas that have a significant amount of sunlight can make a tremendous difference in the thermals. The more timber and the more tree canopy cover you have that prevents that sun from permeating down to the ground level is going to slow down the amount of time it takes for that ground, the ground air to heat up. Cloudy days can create very inconsistent thermals. You're still going to get a thermal pull as things warm up, but it's going to be much, much slower on a cloudy day. And it can be very inconsistent as to just how dramatic the effect of the thermal pull can be. And like I just said, wind strength. A good steady wind can oftentimes defeat a thermal. You might get a little bit of thermal pull, but if you've got, let's say you're facing straight north and you've got a predominant northwest wind, and you're north of you is a ridge line going up, and it's a warm day and everything's warming up. Well, then thermals are going to pull. But if you've got that steady wind, it's going to defeat that thermal, and it's going to curve, and it's going to turn your wind and pull it a different direction until it hits a feature that kills off that wind, and then it might pull again. So just keep that in mind. And thermals and wind, there's nothing better, in my opinion, there's nothing better than using milkweed to determine it. It's really interesting when you have the wind hitting you in the face and you throw a piece of milkweed and you watch it go past your head, and it goes about 15 feet, and then all of a sudden it starts to settle down, and then it picks that thermal up and it pulls right underneath you, and it just starts working right back up, and maybe it goes 50 feet, maybe it goes 20 feet, and then it starts to rise in that thermal again, and then it gets caught by that wind and it gets pulled back down. That just creates a weird swirl, and those can be tricky too. I hope that kind of explains the daily cycle of the thermals. So let's look at thermals now by adding in the terrain aspect of it. Ridges and saddles. If you picture what ridges and saddles look like, and you picture the wind going across them, it's almost like water. The wind is gonna act like water, and it's gonna really want to wrap the contours. Unless you get into super aggressive steep ridges, then that's going to start changing things. But when you've got gentle sloping ridges and you've got gentle saddles, the wind is going to want to travel over those tops just like water. I got to take another drink. Now I'm getting a stuffy nose. I'm just falling apart today, guys. Now I'm drinking water. My voice sounds crazy, and I'm becoming a mouth breather. All right here on camera for you guys. Enjoy. All right. When you get into some deeper cut saddles, those can actually funnel wind, and that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. If you can recognize that, and you're throwing milkweed and you're watching, say you've got a predominant northwest wind, and you are approaching a saddle, and the saddle runs, let's say it runs west to east. So you got a northwest wind, the saddle's running due west, due east. Well, that wind's going to hit that saddle. It rolls into the saddle like water, and it's going to get funneled in there, and it's just going to want to suck right down to the east. Even though your wind's coming out of the northwest blowing southeast, once it hits that opening of that saddle, it's just going to pull in there, and it's just going to want to flow, just like it's a gully with water running through it. Another thing that can happen when you get into saddles is that wind drops in and it just starts creating eddies, and you just get these weird swirls, and it'll swirl, and then it'll pull, and then all of a sudden it's swirling, and then it's coming back to you, and then it swirls and it pulls. It's very inconsistent. Again, milkweed is going to be your lifeline because it's going to tell you what's happening. And just because wind's swirling in the valley or in the saddle doesn't mean you can't hunt that. You just need to know how the wind is swirling in there, and you can make adjustments to how you want to set up in there based on that. So I'm not anti-swirling winds to an extent. I mean, if I can see consistency in how it's swirling, even if it swirls and then pulls and then swirls and pulls back, there's consistency there, and I can see that, and I can make a determination on how I can set up accordingly. Hope that makes sense. Excuse me. When you get into draws and true funnels, air literally gets channeled into those, just like it's getting poured into a funnel. It pulls down into them and it just goes. That can help create a consistent wind direction. Try to give an example here again. Let's go again. Let's say you've got a northwest wind. I'm just going to keep using northwest so it stays consistent throughout my conversation. And let's say you're hunting hill country and you are you're on the upper third of a ridge system, and you've got a bench there or whatever. Maybe you've got a little bit of a hub coming in, and if you can get yourself set up where you've got a deep funnel, like a ravine cut into the ridge, if you can get that tight to your back, even if you've got that northwest wind and then you've got thermals that are pulling up, your wind's coming in, your thermals are pulling up the ridge. That northwest wind, if there's enough of it, can help draw that thermal over, and then it's going to hit that ditch, and it's going to want to suck down in, and then it's going to pull down, or it's going to pull up, depending on how much cover there is in there and how much thermal activity there is in that cut. If there's water in it, like if it's got a steady, a spring-fed ditch system, and oftentimes those deep aggressive cuts in the ridges, they're oftentimes formed by water runoff or by springs. So if you've got cold water in there, that's going to defeat the thermal, or it's not going to defeat the thermal. It's going to reverse the thermal. That cold water is going to keep everything at ground level cool, and it's going to suck your thermal down in, and it's going to pull it back down to the bottom. So I like to be able to set up where I've got cuts. I'll talk about Ohio a lot because I hunt in Ohio a lot, and I'm very familiar with that type of hill country. And it's, I've seen it in other places too. I've seen it in Illinois. I've seen it in Wisconsin. And I've seen it in certain places in Michigan, especially when you get into, some of the bigger ridge systems along some of the rivers here in Michigan. But I love it if I can find a spot where the setup allows me to get tight to one of those cuts. Because to me, then it doesn't really matter as much. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter at all, but it doesn't matter as much what the wind direction is, as long as that direction is pulling my scent towards the cut in some way, shape, or form, whether it's southwest and the ridge is just to my east, or if it's straight west, or if it's northwest. If it's pulling my scent that way, I know it's either going to hit that cut and it's going to pull up, or it's going to pull down. And again, milkweed's going to tell me. And milkweed spoils the thermal. There's no secrets when it comes to scent with milkweed. That's why I love milkweed so much. There's things that can affect not only the wind, but also the thermals. Thick timber, like we said, takes longer for things to heat up, but if it can also affect, say you got an 8 to 10 mile an hour wind, and you've got you're hunting on, again, northwest wind, 8 to 10 miles an hour, and you're up on a ridge top, and it's fairly open hardwoods, and then it hits a let's say it hits a bunch of pine, super thick. That's going to completely change what the wind is doing by the time it gets to you. If you're hunting on the downwind side or the back side of that pine thicket, you say you're hunting that edge, that wind is going to completely change when it comes through those pines. Big tall bluffs can modify and kill a wind. Open fields can completely change velocity of wind and how hard it's coming across. Certain features, the wind, can pick up speed and it can hit this thick timber, or it can hit a bluff, or it can hit an open field, and it can actually make the wind bend around these certain features as well. Obviously, open fields, as long as the wind itself is a steady, consistent wind out of one direction, the more open territory you're in, the more open ground you're hunting, the more consistent that wind's going to be. So if you're hunting you're hunting on a field edge and you've got a wind blowing in your face, the wind itself is going to stay, relatively consistent, obviously. I talked about it already, but I want to reiterate, because water features can completely change what your scent is going to do. I absolutely love water features, just like I said about that cut in the ravine. If it's got water in it, that's a bonus. If I can get into a spot and I get an opportunity to get water very close by to me, I can throw milkweed and I can walk away from that water feature and I can just toss milkweed and I can see how far away from that water feature before that cold air cutting across that water no longer overpowers and the thermals are no longer getting pulled back. So that'll give me an idea of how far away from that I can get. Just something to think about. It also helps anytime you can get water near you. Obviously, it can reduce a deer's ability to get behind you as well. But that's not really a topic that kind of falls in line with what we're talking about here. It's just a side note. But anytime you've got that water feature, it cools the air down and it pulls scent towards the water feature. Really, really prominent in the early mornings and in the evenings. But even when you've got those midday thermals that are wanting to pull up, if you've got cold water behind you, it's going to help pull that scent and it's going to carry right down that water feature. Again, maybe you're hunting a small area and actually the water features in front of you. Say you've got a 10, 15 foot wide creek with flowing water in it, and you're actually set up on one side of it and you're anticipating shooting a deer on the other side of it. That's a situation where you can actually really take advantage of that wind, because you can have a wind that's actually coming across your back and blowing in the direction that you're anticipating the deer coming from. And again, the milkweed's going to tell you this. If you throw milkweed and you watch it, that wind cuts across and then all of a sudden it hits the center of that creek, and just watch that milkweed, it just turns and it just starts following and it drops down close to the water, or it lands in the water and it just pulls. Well, that's what your scent is doing. But a deer's not going to recognize that, because a deer's still going to feel that wind. So it's going to feel very confident that there's no way anything's going to get between it and where it's going without it smelling you. Very, very powerful tool. Just, again, I know a lot of us already know this, but just something to continue to think about. I got to take another drink. Sorry. How do we use all this information? That's the important part right there. When we think about wind and thermals, we gotta think about how we're going to apply them to our hunting strategy. So what we want to do is we want to look at. I love to look at aerial maps, especially when I'm going out of state or I'm going to places I've never hunted before, and I'm looking for features based on predominant wind or what the forecast for the wind is going to be. I'm looking all the time, but I start 10 days out, and then I'm looking 5 days out, and then I'm looking 3 days out, and then I'm looking, the next morning type of deal. So I'm looking at the aerials, I'm looking at that predominant wind, and I'm setting up plans based on it. But it's not just based on the wind. I'm also looking at terrain features and how I believe the thermals are going to impact that wind as well. So that's a strategy that I use. How I translate that into, something actionable when I'm in the woods is when I get in there, I'm testing my theories as I'm going. As I'm making my way into a spot, I'm throwing milkweed, and is it doing what I think it's going to do? And as I get in here to a certain topographical feature, and I'm throwing that milkweed, is it still doing what I think it's doing? And if it's doing what I think it's doing when it's cold out, that gives me a high level of confidence that as the thermals change, what I saw on my maps and what I'm picturing in my mind is going to be consistent, because so far what I've put into mental practice is actually happening in the woods. And now there's plenty of times where that changes. You get in there and maybe the terrain, it looks more aggressive than it actually is when you get in there, or it looks much less aggressive. I should say that's probably more common. It will look like it's not as an aggressive terrain feature until you actually get in there and you're like, wow, they need to tighten up those those topo lines, because this is much steeper than it looked on a map. But still, I'm continuing to throw milkweed. It's going to help me. It's going to help me kind of sort things out and make determinations on, even if I'm going to want to continue to get into a certain area, do I need to change my approach? Do I need to change my access? Do I need to change the elevation at which I want to get set up at? Am I going to try to approach at the same level that I believe the deer are on? Or am I going to continue to come in from the bottom, et cetera, et cetera? Excuse me. I also think about my entry and exits to these locations as I'm walking in. I don't ever want to run the risk of just blowing my scent cone into where I think deer are going to bed, or into where I think they are coming from. So you got to think about that. And you just got to remember that scent cone gets wider as it disperses, and just continue to make sure you're understanding what that wind is going to do. And on an out-of-state hunt, when you're going in, say in the morning, you can throw milkweed and get you can get a 10, 15 foot idea of what it's doing through a red light or something, but you can't see it all the way. So you got to use your scouting that you're doing on aerial, and you've got to take what little bit of information you can get from the milkweed in the dark to solidify your thought as to how you were approaching, or if you need to make a change to it. When it comes to morning hunts, I already talked about it, but typically it's very risky to get higher up on ridge systems, because as the day progresses, that thermal is going to pull your scent up. But if you're anticipating deer being down below you and you're trying to intercept them coming up, first thing in the morning, your thermals are pulling down. So that's another situation where I like to use a cut wind or an off wind or something if I have a topographical feature in there that will allow me to do it. If I can get into a spot and I think I'm in the right area and I can find a deep cut coming off the top, and I can get up tight to that, then I can use that so that even though thermals are pulling my scent down and deer are anticipating that as they're moving up, my thermals are actually dropping down into this deep cut that they're not accessing, and it's pulling my scent right past them, is kind of what I'm looking for there. Let's see. We talked about obviously we don't want to blow our scent into the bedding or feeding areas as we're approaching. In the mornings, unless I have the features that I just talked about, I prefer to stay on the lower side of the hills, lower parts of the ridges, or get up into the elevation at which I believe the deer are coming in from. If I believe they're coming in from the bottom, I'm going to start in the bottom, and I'm just going to, I might only sit there for the first hour of daylight, maybe 2 hours. And if the sun really starts heating things up and I'm watching my milkweed and it stops pulling down and it starts pulling up, there's a good chance I might slip down and try to work my way up to a higher elevation closer to where I think a buck could be bedded, or work my way around and maybe he's bedded on the upper third and I can get myself around him and again use a cut wind in anticipation for as evening approaches. Maybe there's destination food sources up on top and I can get between him and that. If I don't capitalize on him in the morning, then maybe I can do that and I can use that cut wind and play the thermals, and the thermals are going to pull. And if he gets up early, maybe I'm lucky and the thermals continue to pull. Or if he waits till, the very last portion of daylight, like they often do, I can use the terrain features. And even though my thermals are going to start turning and pulling down. If I have the ability to use a terrain feature to modify what that thermal is actually going to do, then I can take advantage of that as well. And these are all scenarios that can change. I mean, 50 yards one direction or the other can completely change how these strategies work. So you got to be throwing milkweed all the time. And I know that seems like you're overly complicating the hunt. Why don't you just, not hunt the morning and go set up tight to the food source? Well, if the food source is on private, I'm not going to go hunt right on the private line. As long as you're on the public, I guess you can do that. I don't like doing it. I don't like doing it for a number of reasons. One, it's typically, I don't know, to me, it's kind of in bad taste to get right up on a property line, whether you're on private and it's your own property and you're hunting right on the line, or if you're hunting public and you're getting tight right up to somebody's private line. There's certain situations where you just can't avoid it. But I try not to as much as I can. But, and I also don't want, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't want the temptation. If we want to be perfectly honest with you, the last thing I want is I set up, 5 yards off of a public to private transition, and I can see an ag field. And I don't want the temptation where if I'm trying to anticipate something's coming from behind me on the public and I'm going to get that shot off, and maybe I don't get the shot off and it ends up on the private side of that fence, or if there's no fence, it just ends up on the private side of the line. I don't want that temptation of a shot being there. I also don't want the temptation of if a deer comes in from a completely unpredicted direction and they cut across the field, the next thing I know, they're feeding, 15 yards in front of me on private. I don't want that temptation either. I'm not saying I would act on it. I don't want to put myself in that situation, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm talking about there. I don't even know if what I just said made sense because I kind of went on a tangent. But anyway, I got to take another drink here. I'm trying not to sneeze on my mic. Hang on one second. Man, no fun. It's going to be a NyQuil night for me. I can already tell. Let's see here. Let me get to my next page of notes here. Let's talk a little bit more about the off-wind setups. I kind of elaborated on it a little bit earlier. The reason why I like them so much is because it really does give the deer, I don't want to say it gives them confidence because they don't understand what confidence is, but they feel very comfortable as they're moving. If you're hunting basically where your scent should be blowing right at them, but you're just cutting it, or you're using a feature that's pulling your wind with a thermal to curve around them or to manipulate it away from them, they feel very confident in the direction that they're traveling, that they're going to do so safely. Again, hunting those cut winds or whiskey winds or off winds, whatever you want to call them, it's going to be risky and you're going to get busted. One slight shift in the wind direction or the wind speed at the wrong moment can blow that hunt. You can have a deer that's 5 steps away from being right in your shooting lane, and all of a sudden the wind shifts by 2 degrees, and it takes just a little bit longer for whatever that feature that you're using the thermals on. It takes just a little bit longer before it catches it and pulls it away, and boom, just like that, you're busted. Again, when you're trying to use these off winds, anytime you can get a terrain barrier or a water feature, a rock bluff, a thick wall of cover, anything that can manipulate that wind, and you can validate it by throwing milkweed again, that's going to help you to see just how far you can put that cut wind before there's a fine line where you want to ride that line, but it can be just a couple of feet can make all the difference, or just a slight shift in the wind can make all the difference. So anytime you can find a feature that's going to give you just a little bit more buffer, let's call it, the better your chances of staying on that line and riding that line to success. The adjustments that we have to make. again, I'm always throwing milkweed. Not so much when I'm hunting on my private property or hunting areas that I'm, intimately familiar with. But when I'm going into new land, or if I'm going into to hunt an out of state public land hunt or whatever, I'm throwing milkweed constantly as I'm walking, as I'm sitting. If I'm sitting and I'm watching milkweed and it's not quite doing what I want it to do, I'm not going to give it a ton of time. I might give it, 20 minutes. And if it's still not doing what I want it to do, I'm watching the milkweed until I see it react the way I want it to react. And then I might have to modify my setup accordingly to get it to where the milkweed is actually doing what I need it to do, because that means my scent is then going to do what I need it to do. Um, Again, and this one's simple, but sometimes we just forget about it. The wind forecast, even, whether it's the weather service or an app, whatever it is, that's just a forecast, and it can change just because it changes, or it can change again because of all the different things we talked about in here when it comes to terrain and barriers and cover and foliage and all that. It can all make it change. But if you're going into a spot and as you're going in, you check it at the truck and you're like, all right, it seems to be doing about what I need it to do. And as you're going in, it's changing, and it's not doing what the forecast is saying it's going to do. You got to make a decision. You don't want to force it, because you could eventually just screw yourself. You could bust deer out of there before you ever even get into where you want to go. So if the forecast is not matching reality, don't force it. Modify your game plan. Just stop, take a minute. Again, the beauty of having one of these, having a smartphone and having an app like an Onyx or Hunt Stand or Spartan Forge or whatever you use out there, you can stop, you can reevaluate based on the knowledge you have now firsthand and looking at the terrain, and you can modify your approach. If you might still be able to get to the same location, but you might have to modify the way you're getting there. So just keep that in mind. Don't force it, is what I'm saying. In a very long way, that's what I'm saying. If you have the ability and you get in there and just nothing's freaking working right, like it's just not there, you don't see a way that you can get in there. Well, you don't want your night to be ruined. So make sure you have a couple of different locations within this chunk of woods that you're looking to hunt, so that you can make a modification. Then you don't have to force it. I'll get much more aggressive on an out of state hunt, because it's usually a short hunt anyway. So when I say don't force it, I'm going to be more aggressive and lean more towards the almost reckless side when it comes to that win. And I'm going to do my very, very best to try to make it work, if that makes sense. Let's say I'm there for 4 days. If I blow this one spot up, I'm going to move on to the next one. Now, if it's just completely not working, I'm not going to blow it up. But if I'm like, man, this is super, super tight, and there's like an 80% chance that this isn't going to work, that 20% chance is probably enough for me to try to push in on it and try to make it work. So I'm going to be aggressive, but there is going to come a time where I'm just going to say, I can't make this work, if that makes sense. We talked already about the tools that are there that can help us understand and see the wind in real time. We've got the apps, we've got the weather channel, all that good stuff is a great initial tool, but nothing replaces what we actually see real world. So when it comes to wind checking tools, most people know the powder puffs. Not a huge fan. I usually carry one. Full disclosure, I drop milkweed all the time, but if I'm like in a hurry and I just need to really quickly see what the predominant wind is doing, it's nice to just be able to grab a puffer, hit it, and just get a quick visual, and then I can keep moving. But I don't always carry one, but I always have milkweed on me. That's, to me, it's the number one most effective way. Another one that I have not done, but I've seen some guys talk about it, and man, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's a hell of a bow hunter. And I've heard him talk about it. Maybe he'll come to me as we talk, but he actually ties a piece of sewing thread. I think he actually ties it right on his arrow, um, like an 8-inch piece of it. And he says it doesn't affect his arrow flight, but it gives him an instant visual that he says is really good for him as deer are approaching. So he's got his bow ready, and he's watching that deer come in. He's actually looking at that piece of sewing thread that's hanging, and he's watching it. And if he sees it and it's picking up and it's pointing 10 yards in front of where that deer is standing, he knows that's probably as far as that deer's going to get before he gets busted. So he's looking to make his shot before then. I've never done that, but I think that's a great idea. I'm always a little weird about putting stuff on my arrows. But maybe you could tie it onto a stabilizer, or maybe tie it onto your arrow and test it beforehand and make sure that you're confident. I don't think a piece of sewing thread is going to affect your arrow flight, but again, I'd want to prove that out. But I think that's a great idea. I think it's awesome to have that instant feedback, because especially when you're playing these cut winds or these just off winds, like I said, it can be a matter of just a couple of feet can make or break the hunt. So that's a great quick visual to let you know, hey, if he gets to here, you're screwed. Or if he gets to here, he's going to smell you. So you better be at full draw, and you better be able to hold it, and you better have a hole picked out right there, because he's going to pump the brakes as soon as he hits it. And before he's able to put 2 and 2 together, you need to be able to get an arrow in him. So there's something to that. I think that's a great idea, and people probably already know about that. But when I heard about it, it was only, I don't know, a month or two ago that I read it or saw him do a video on it. And I was like, man, that's a really good idea, especially for somebody like me that likes to hunt that cut wind. I don't know exactly where that deer's going to catch my wind at, and that would be a great quick visual aid to let me know. So I like that idea. So keep that one in mind. Again, we talked about the tech tools. Guys, we do live in a digital age. There's nothing wrong with carrying aerial maps around with you. In fact, when you're hunting large expanses of areas, it's probably always good to have a physical map and an actual compass with you when you're hunting these areas. Things can go sideways in a hurry. You can get turned around. Snowstorms can come in, bad wind can come in, it can knock stuff down, it can disorient you. So yeah, it's probably always a good idea to have a map and a compass on you. But when it just comes to the day-to-day mundane task of when you're out there hunting, take advantage of the fact that you've got a cell phone with you, and download, an Onyx or a Spartan Forge or Hunt Stand or something. It's just a quick tool that's going to help give you a lot of references. And I'm sure 99% of you out there already do that. So, I don't need to beat that over the head. Again, the milkweed, drop it often, drop it, and don't just drop it and be like, okay, it's going that way. Watch it. You can watch milkweed for a long, long ways, and it can tell you so much more than a wind puffer can. I love it. I'm sitting in the stand. I'm dropping milkweed like every 5 minutes. I always have it I've got like a chest pouch, and I have the milkweed inside of a container right there, and I just reach in there and I just pull it out, and I just flick it off my fingers, and I just watch it do its thing. You can learn so much from milkweed. Anybody that doesn't carry milkweed, drop me a comment and tell me what you do to check wind, and I challenge you to go get milkweed and throw milkweed and tell me that it's not better, because I don't think there's anything better. So prove me wrong. Again, when it comes to the milkweed, you can sit there, and I love doing this even on my home turf in stands that I only hunt based on a prevailing wind. I just like to see what the wind does throughout the course of the day. So I still drop milkweed and I just watch it, and I'm like, okay, wow. Middle of the day, even with this wind coming across this field, I'm on a ridge edge, and as it drops down, my milkweed starts to drop with the elevation. Then all of a sudden it catches a thermal and it just goes straight up in the air, and I lose it up in the treetops. I just love to see what the wind does throughout the course of the day. And again, milkweed is going to tell you more than anything will. Obviously, we want to use wind and throw milkweed when we're scouting. It's going to help us make determination on how we can approach certain areas, etc., etc. Bear with me one more time. I think I can get through it after this with one last drink. Let's kind of put it all together and try to drive it home. When I first started going to Ohio, I had hunted some hill country in Michigan, but nothing like what I hunt down in Ohio. And I didn't really. I understood wind, I understood thermals, but I was not putting two and two together when I was going out there. I was approaching in the mornings from tops, primarily because you get into some of that hill country and it's not easy. You gotta oftentimes get to where you need to get. You got to do it the hard way if you want to do it and actually beat the wind or use the wind to your advantage. I shouldn't say beat the wind. I don't ever beat the wind. I just use it to my advantage and with thermals. But when I first would go down there, oftentimes in the mornings I would approach from the tops, knowing damn well that my thermals were pulling, but I just kind of risked it and hope that it worked for me. Now when I do it, I approach completely different. If I got to get to my spot, at 3:00 in the morning, so be it. If it's going to take me that long because I got to go the hard way or the long way to get to where I need to hunt, that's what I'm going to do. And I do that now because I got busted. I got busted several times the first couple of years I went to Ohio, just because of really bad approaches and not thinking about things. And it wasn't always just in the mornings. It was when you get into hill country, you got to remember that there's a lot of different places bucks can bed. There's no this is the bedding area. They can literally bed on 500 fingers that come off this main ridge. They can bed right on the side slope of the ridge. They can bed anywhere they want, and it's all for them. It's gonna depend on where they feel that the wind is giving them the safest place to do so. So I got busted a lot. Then I really started thinking about it, and I was like, I can't keep doing it this way because getting busted when you're not even to your spot yet really sucks, kind of pisses you off, right? So then I started paying closer attention to the thermals. I started reading up on it, and I started watching videos to help me better understand the nuances and learning how, even if I have to approach from this direction, if there's a way I can do it where I get close to some kind of feature that's going to manipulate my wind, then I'm going to do it that way. Things like that. When we're hunting in the evenings again, if you've got a nice sunny day, even in the evenings, it's the feeling. How do I want to word this? Nice sunny day. Let's say the high of the day was like 62, 65 degrees. So not hot, but it was a nice sunny day. Everything warmed up. It's one of those days where in the middle of the day, that sun's just kind of hitting you in the face and you just want to sack out, right? Well, what are your thermals doing? They're rising. Now, if it stays sunny like that all the way till sunset, your thermals are not going to change a whole lot. And then they're going to change very quickly when that sun, as soon as the sun drops over the tree line and you feel that temperature change, that's how quickly the thermals are going to start to change. So keep that in mind as well. Not just in the mornings. It doesn't just take a long time for them to heat up, but it can also take a long time for it to cool down, or I shouldn't say a long time, but it can happen much later than you would think. And again, when that sun disappears, it does not take long for things to cool and things to change. So keep that one in mind as well. And then again, last but not least, and this is again my favorite portion of it, is hunting that kill wind, the cut wind, the whiskey wind, whatever you want to call it. Learn how to capitalize on it. Again, you're going to get busted. You're going to get busted a lot. It's not a high odds thing. It's not going to be like, 60% of the time it works every time. It's not going to be one of those situations. You're going to get busted. But like I said last week, the more you do it, The more familiar you get with it, the more you understand the nuances of what these different features can do to give you that edge against the deer when the deer thinks it's got the wind, but you're using your knowledge of thermals and your visuals by your milkweed, and you know exactly what things are doing. Again, you'll get in the action. You're going to get busted. It's going to happen. So keep that in mind. When it comes to any of this, wind, thermals, hot winds, all that good stuff, like I said, it's experience that's gonna bring it together for you. And I said it last week. You'll probably screw it up. Oops, sorry, kicked my desk. You'll probably screw it up a lot when you first start. You're probably gonna get pissed. But it's just part of the learning experience, just like anything else. You don't just give up because it's hard. You learn from the screw ups, right? So the experience is gonna make it just better and better for you. I never trust my predictions. I do make my predictions based on prevailing wind, based on terrain, but I don't just make a prediction and then just go to my spot and get up there and be like, oh, well, I screwed that up. I'm testing my prediction the whole way in, and I'm making changes based on my predictions. If my predictions aren't working as the way I anticipated, I gotta make things, I gotta shift things. And that doesn't necessarily mean I gotta give up on a spot. I just might have to change my approach to how I'm getting to it, or I might have to modify how I wanted to set up on it. So be flexible. Don't trust your predictions, validate your predictions. I think that's pretty much it. Not quite sure how long we went. I feel like I went a little quicker than I meant to, but I feel like I kind of covered it all. So I'm pretty happy with it. Just a quick recap. When you think about it, think about wind as the direction the air is moving. Think about thermals as the daily cycle of rising and lowering based on temperature. Terrain, that's the modifiers that can play tricks on the thermals and the wind. And then your strategy on cut winds. And how you can execute them can really completely change the way you hunt. So just keep that in mind. Final thought, the most dangerous hunter is not the one with the best camouflage. He's not the quietest one. He's not the best shot. It doesn't matter what kind of equipment he's using. The best hunter is the one that can beat the deer's nose by using the wind to his advantage while giving the deer the feeling that it has the wind at its advantage. And that's just it. The best hunters are the ones that understand wind and thermals and understand how to apply them. I am not that guy. Full disclosure, I am learning how to be that guy. And I don't, it's one of those things, just like anything in life, you don't stop learning. You just keep doing it and keep getting better and keep getting better. So, yeah. That's it, guys. I hope there was something in there for you. I hope after this, everybody goes out. Right now is prime milkweed season. So go out, get yourself some pods, open them up, dry that stuff out. Once you get it dry, I store it. I've got 5-gallon Ziploc bags in my hunting stuff that I just keep it. And I make my own little containers. I used to use just a can of chew because I chewed for a number of years. I would just take a can of chew when it was empty. I would clean it out really good, wash it out, and then I would poke a hole in the bottom of the can, like a star-shaped hole or an X cut, whatever you want to call it. I would stuff the can full of milkweed, the lid on, flip it over, and just work that X cut until I pulled it, and then it pulls out like tissue paper. I still do that. I just don't use chew cans anymore. I probably still, actually, full disclosure, I probably still have like 2 of them that I still do use. But electrical tape you can get electrical tape in like those round little plastic containers. That works. What do they call, lifesavers or whatever, the mints come in, those work. I mean, there's baggies out there that are designed to carry milkweed. I think like the Hunting Public boys, I think they sell them. It's like private labeled with their logo on it, where it's just like a mesh bag that you shove it in and you just pull it out of the mesh. But yeah, use milkweed. If I could tell you anything and you learn anything out of this, if you're not already using it, use milkweed. That wraps it up, guys. Don't know if we're going to have a guest next week. I should take that back. Very likely not going to have a guest next week because I am actually leaving in 2 days from today. If you're listening on the day of the drop, I'm leaving on Thursday. I'm going to go do some camping. My wife and I, it's going to be our last camping trip before fall sets in. So I will be gone Thursday, Friday, Saturday, coming home Sunday. So I'll likely record Sunday night, and it will likely be a solo one. And I don't even know what I'm going to record on yet. So it could be a BS session. I could come up with something awesome. Who knows? You guys will just have to wait and see. So continue to follow, like, share, all that good stuff. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Go to the website, check it out. Give me feedback, guys. Anything that you want to see done better or differently, I'm all ears. I just want to continue to make it better. Again, like I've said many times, I do this because I love hunting. I'm ate up with whitetail hunting in particular, but I just love to hunt and I love to talk about it. And if I wasn't doing it in front of a camera, I'd be inside annoying my wife right now talking about it or texting the boys because that's all we do. So I appreciate the support. We're over 725 subscribers now, I believe. So I think we've like net 10 or 15 just in the past week. It's awesome. Love the support. I really do appreciate it, guys. Do me a favor if you do, watch on YouTube or on Spotify, please hit the like, hit the subscribe, share it, and follow. It helps grow things. Just the way that, that's how you get scaled by YouTube. That's how Facebook rates you. All that stuff is the likes, the shares, the subscribes. It helps bump you up so that you get a little more visibility. So, please do so if you can. I would greatly appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you guys again. Go shoot your bows. Season is right around the corner. Enjoy this week. If you're in the West Michigan area, we finally got some rain. Pray to God my food plots take off because they were not looking good the other day. But everything I got on camera is hardhorn. I'm getting a lot of buck fights on camera, a lot of sparring, a lot of pushing, shoving. Got some new boys showed up the past couple days. I'm excited, guys. I'm fired up. So thanks again for tuning in. Really, really do appreciate you guys. This is Wild Spirits Outdoors. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Wild Spirits Outdoors. We appreciate you joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, follow, and share wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us grow the tribe and keep on chasing the wild. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Wild Spirits Outdoors, and also on YouTube at Wild Spirits Pod. You can also head over to www.wildspiritsoutdoors.com for more content. Until next time, chase the wild, feel the spirit,